Welcome, everybody. I am Sandy Treadholm. I'm the collection director for the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, and we're very excited to talk to you today about some of the D-Day items in the Gilder Lehrman collection. Joining me today is Professor Michael Neiberg from the U.S. Army War College. So, Michael, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Michael Neiberg. As Sandy said, I teach here at the Army War College in Carlisle, PA, where my students are mostly senior officers in the U.S. military and about 88 allied and partner nations. And I'm an historian of World War I and World War II with a special focus on the French experience and the American experience.
That sounds really exciting. We'll have to share some of our French materials with you. I didn't realize you were. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Shelby Miller, our curatorial intern, is joining us on the back end. So she is popping things into the chat for you. She's also watching the Q&A. So say hi to Shelby. It's her final night of ITV. She's going to be moving on to another internship next week. So we've had a really great time with Shelby and want to thank her. And finally, Allison Kraft, who's our assistant curator, is going to tell us how to participate this evening.
If there is a question that you have for our panel this evening, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We are going to be answering questions throughout the session. So if a question comes to you, don't hang on to it, pop it in the Q&A. For safety, security, and privacy of all of those who are in tonight's session, your microphones and cameras are off and the chat is disabled. Again, if you want to talk to us, please use that Q&A feature.
Thanks, Allison. And before we jump into what are we talking about tonight, I just want to introduce tonight's documents. We have a map from Operation Overlord, and I bet some people are wondering what that is. What is Operation Overlord? Correspondence between Mo and Sylvia Weiner dated June 6, 1944. Both of them were writing actually on D-Day to each other, and a letter from Sidney Diamond stationed in the Pacific to his fiancée Estelle Spero, June 7th, 1944. And just like a quick shout out to the Library of Congress, all the photographs that you're going to see tonight of actual D-Day gatherings are from the Library of Congress. It was really fascinating to go through them all and find ones that we could put into the program tonight. So with that, I want to turn over to Michael. And what can you tell us about Operation Overlord and D-Day?
Yeah, I'm going to try to do this in really quickly in just 5 minutes or so to explain a little bit of what's going on. The map that you're seeing is of what Army planners either would have called the Lodgeman area or the Baie de la Seine. And what you'll see on the map, you can make it out on the kind of almost to the right-hand side of the map. There is a port city there called Le Havre, right about where you've got your right there. And on the western edge of this map, and you see this peninsula that's on the west called the Cotentin Peninsula. And on the north of it is a city called Cherbourg. What the Allies have learned thus far from doing amphibious operations is that attacking a port city rarely goes well. So the idea, because you destroy the very thing you're trying to capture. So the idea of this operation is to land in the area between Cherbourg and Le Havre, what's known as the Baie de la Seine, where there are no port facilities, move inland to the two cities that you see that are kind of controlling the road network. The one that Sandy's got around right there is the city of Caen, C-A-E-N, and just to the northwest of there, the beautiful medieval village of Bayeux, which if you're going to Normandy, that's the town that I recommend everybody stay in and everybody base themselves in part because on D-Day they got in quickly enough that city did not get damaged, which is the opposite experience that Caen had. At any rate, the idea is to get into this Lodgeman area and then take the two port cities, Cherbourg and Le Havre, from the land side in order to minimize the damage that could be done. The danger here, the risk here, is you have to get to these towns quickly enough that the Germans don't have the opportunity to destroy the ports themselves. So this is an operation that's going to require very careful timing. On the strategic level, the idea of this landing is to really, it depends on who you're talking to, but there really are three goals for this. One, if you're talking to the Russians, is to take some pressure off of the Eastern Front, force the Germans off of the East a little bit, and give the Russians a chance to launch their own summer offensive of 1944, which they will do. It is an offensive that is enormous in scale and scope and dwarfs what the Allies do in Overlord. There is, of course, the strategic goal of liberating France and liberating Paris and getting France out from under the Nazi thumb. And there is the third goal of moving quickly from France over into Holland and Belgium and capturing those port cities. Port cities are the absolute key to all of this, because you cannot sustain an Allied operation in France if you can't hold those ports. So the two things that I wanted to just go over as we think about this, and I'm happy to talk much more about this operation in Q&A if folks have questions. The two things that are really going on here are again, how to sustain an operation if you know you're not going to have port cities when you do it. And some of you may know part of the answer they come up with here, which is something called mulberries, which are two artificial harbors that the Allies, well, mostly the British, will build just off the coast of Normandy. The remnants of one are still there. If you go to Normandy today to a town called Ouistreham, you can still see it. Friends of mine have gone scuba diving out there. You can actually dive around the thing. So it's kind of a remarkable thing to think about. And the second is the very, very careful coordination to try to get these guys that are going to do this invasion as much protection as you can from the air and the sea. And again, I can talk more about the things that go well here and the things that don't go well here. But if you look at this lodgement area, you want to think of it divided into kind of 5 sections, if you will. And the 5 sections are 2 in the west, which will be the American beaches that get American code names. They are Utah, which is on the eastern edge of the Cotentin Peninsula there. And then Omaha, which is the one that many of you know is the one that goes the least well. It's the one that's featured in that opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan. It's the one that militarily does not work the way that it's supposed to. There are 2 British beaches, Sword and Gold, and in between the 2 British beaches is a Canadian beach codenamed Juno. So it is what we would call a coalition operation right from the very beginning, because it involves the British, the Americans, the Canadians, and it also involves a few Free French units that are involved. It's also a joint operation in that the air, sea, and land operations all have to be coordinated very, very carefully. And Eisenhower did a politically very smart thing here in keeping overall command as an American, but instead of dividing command between the nationalities, he set up separate air, sea, joint sea, air, and land components, all commanded by Brits, so that everybody was kind of involved in this. And Sandy, if I can, for just one more minute, the way this is designed to operate is the night before D-Day, there are airborne drops on the west, on the kind of southern end of the Cotentin Peninsula, and another set of airborne drops that occur in the east at a place called Pegasus Bridge, which you can also still visit. The idea is that big red road that you see there, the idea is for those paratroopers to hold that red road so that the Germans can't bring supplies or forces in from the east and west. Now, while that's going on, there's also been a preparatory bombardment period where Allied airplanes, British and American airplanes, have been bombarding not just the D-Day area, but all of northern France. Because, of course, if you only bomb what you see here on this map, the Germans will know exactly where the invasion is coming. And that's, of course, the last thing that you want. So there is this kind of moral, strategic, big question about how much damage you're going to do to a country that you're intending to liberate. And I can talk more about that because I find it kind of fascinating. And I have some French friends, French colleagues, I should say, probably more than friends, who were children at this time living in Normandy. And I've had some very interesting conversations with them about that. At the same time, there's, of course, this sea operation called Operation Neptune, where each one of those codenamed beaches has its own dedicated naval force, not just to bring men and supplies onto the beaches here in Normandy, but to provide fire, to provide naval gunfire to help try to take out some of the German positions that are here. And the last thing I want to just say is a little bit from the German side. The Germans have built something here called the Atlantic Wall, but please don't think of it as a wall. That's not what it is. It is a system of artillery, observation posts, communication posts, all connected by telephone and telegraph. So it's really a very sophisticated command and control system that's going on here. And I can talk a little bit more about that, and I can talk more about the German response here, which to me is very interesting about how the Germans do what they do here in Normandy. But I think that gives a bit of an overall perspective here. Again, the 2 American sectors are to the left of this map, the west of the lodgement area. Utah Beach, which is on the east side of the Cotentin Peninsula, and then Omaha Beach, the one that is probably the best known today, where the massive American cemetery is, that is just right where the Cotentin Peninsula kind of bends to the east there, and then to the east. It's further to the southeast. Keep going southeast. Yeah, and then go east here a little bit from Bayeux, kind of over to the west is the Omaha Beach. So yeah, there you go. The right half of this blown up part of the map. So it's a very complicated, very sophisticated operation. Eisenhower knew full well that if this failed, the chances of getting back onto the continent in 1944 were probably impossible. It was going to be 1945 or maybe even 1946. And the very last thing I'll say, Sandy, I know I promised I'd stay to 5 minutes, is the overall grand strategic problem that if this doesn't work, the odds that the Second World War is an absolute, maybe even almost an exclusive Soviet victory is staring everybody in the face as well. If you don't do this operation successfully, it's very likely that much more of Europe would have been conquered by the Soviet Union. So even though the United States and Britain are allied with the Soviets, by this point, you're also looking towards the post-war world, and a world where the Soviet Union controls Holland, Belgium, much of France, is not a world that anybody really wants to think about either. So there are big stakes here, and I'll talk a little bit at the end about Eisenhower, but I think that probably sets it up fairly well. And again, any questions folks have, I'm happy to answer.
How many troops were involved?
Well, that's a good question. So there are three airborne divisions. An airborne division is a little bit smaller than an infantry division, so about 10,000 men per, maybe even less than that, about 7,000. There are also glider units involved. And then there are 7 amphibious divisions, and a division in this time period is roughly 18,000 men in that first and second wave. And then, of course, the idea is that you'll bring in many more people in the second and third waves. You could probably find the exact numbers easily enough on the internet, but the way we think of it at the Army War College, you think in terms of units and groups. So it's 3 airborne and glider divisions, and it's 7 amphibious divisions.
And is there any secret to why they called it Operation Overlord, or did they just pick a name?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. They what they did in World War II is they basically created a whole bunch of names that meant nothing and more or less put them in a hat, and then started picking them so that there could be no accidental giving away, unlike what we do now, Operation Enduring Freedom, where the code name is aimed to say something. In this time period, they're really trying to do it randomly. And there was this crossword puzzle in, I believe, the London Times, in which words like Overlord, Omaha, Neptune all appeared in this crossword puzzle. And it freaked out the Allied intel people for obvious reasons, because they were worried that this was a code being given to the Germans through the crossword puzzle. So this really wonderful moment where everybody's just thinking, my God, has our operational security been broken? And they do this whole investigation, and they make the calculation that they don't have any evidence that would suggest that. So there's no point overturning the entire operation for it. So I think it's one of the reasons that this has drawn so much attention, especially in the United States and in Great Britain, because of the human drama that surrounds this. And also, as I've been there a lot, it is a phenomenal place to visit. And as I said, Bayeux is just as pretty and beautiful a town in the north of France as you'll come across. One of my favorite towns in all of Europe.
Very cool.
Or we move on to the next piece. There's a question here from Mike, who wants to know, if D-Day had failed, how long do you think it would have taken to try a second landing?
There were plans which they actually executed in late August, to go through southern France. They go up through the Rhone River, which, I was just having this conversation just a couple of months ago with some friends who are also historians of France. We don't talk about this operation, which is called Operation Dragoon, in large part because it worked exactly the way that it was supposed to work. So it's weird. We don't often talk about the successes the way we talk about the failures and near failures. So my point here, I guess, is that it's entirely possible that had Overlord failed, they would have done Operation Dragoon anyway. And we might be thinking of this as a southern French operation rather than a northern one. If this had failed badly, I think the odds are that the Allies give up on coming into northern France at all and either go through southern France or go directly into Holland or Belgium with all of the risks that that entailed. One of the reasons that they want to do Overlord where they do it is because it's easy to protect it with fighter air cover based in bases in England. You don't want to do anything like this unless you can guarantee that the planes above you are friendly. And if you ever look at videos or pictures of D-Day, you'll see all the airplanes have black and white stripes on the wings. Those are specific to D-Day, so that an American or British soldier who's on the beach, if they look up and they see black and white stripes, they know not to shoot at it. If they don't see black and white stripes, if it flies, it dies, get it out of the air. So that's a large part of this. If this had failed, I think it would have been really hard to do it again this way. My guess is they would have transferred assets to the south and tried to do it from southern France, but it would have been far less spectacularly strategically important.
Right, and this is one of a set of series of 8 maps that we have from Operation Overlord, and those should all be available on our website, so you can download them and blow them up and really investigate. And with that, we're going to move to our next set of documents. And what we found really interesting about this is, how do people learn about D-Day? Like, not only back home, but Sidney's stationed in the South Pacific, North Pacific. He's in Manila. And what did it mean to them? So we are going to jump right into our very first letter, which is from Morris Mo Weiner. He was born on December 10th, 1909. He attended Brooklyn College and was drafted in 1943 when he was assigned to the Army Quartermaster Corps. And for clarification, he wasn't in that first wave. He came over a few days later, and we know that through his letters. We have all of his correspondence transcribed. He attained the rank of a technical sergeant and died on March 14th, 1988 in Oceanside, New York. So he did survive throughout the war. That's a picture of him and his wife, taken in 1943, probably right before he shipped out. And with that, I'm going to ask Allison to read the first letter before we discuss it. And this is only a short part of it. What's really interesting about the letter is the top half of the first page is what you're seeing here, and then the rest of the letter was about other things.
Other goings on. Tuesday, June 6th, 1944. Dearest Syl, it's a little hard to sit down and calmly write a letter, just as though nothing were happening. Of course, nothing has happened except the most world-shaking event. Although I'm bursting to talk about it, I can't. Not that I know anything, even opinions are taboo at this particular stage. However, I can say I am glad that the long, wearisome wait is over. How, when, and where did you first hear about it? Did you, upon getting up in the morning, turn on the radio as we used to do? Or did you know earlier? I see by the papers that Rome has been taken. Well, that too is okay. In fact, everything taken into consideration, things march well. And I want to pause super quickly and just say that you'll see in the line where he says how, when, and where, there is a little bracketed sick that is inserted into transcriptions to let the reader know that the spelling of the previous word is how the author spelled that word. So we know that he meant to say W-H-E-R-E, but he writes W-E-A-R. So that lets us know that that is how Mo spelled the word.
So Mike, what should we be looking at?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I love here. As an historian, I love looking at people's lived experiences, how they understood this. And I do want to start. The Americans did liberate Rome on June 5th. So that, to place D-Day in context, Rome is the first Axis capital to fall, and then this operation happens. So it's it's obviously a very big turning point in the West. I also love the although I'm bursting to talk about it, I can't. Not that I know anything, right? So that tells me two things that I always love when I'm looking at letters like this. The first is that most of these guys don't actually know anything at all, right? They're dealing with rumor. They're seeing what's in front of them. And some of them are quite open and honest about that. They'll write letters in which they say, look, I don't know what the officers were thinking. I don't know what I only saw the thing that I was doing. And a tech sergeant in the Quartermaster Corps is going to be involved in logistics and getting supplies to the front, and clearly not involved in strategy. So I love the fact that he says, not that I know anything, right? So I'm not here. The other thing that I always note about things like this is that long, wearisome wait, right? The tension is released, that we now know what we're doing. We now know, remember, this is June of 1944. The US began its war in Europe in 1942 in November by going into North Africa and then to Sicily and then to mainland Italy, which are all kind of understood to be sideshows. They're all understood to be something that's getting you to a point, but it's not getting you to the thing you know you need to do. So part of this long, wearisome wait is that sense that, okay, we're finally getting to the point where we're going to do something that is strategically important. So those are the things that immediately struck me. And also just the way he begins that by saying, it's hard to do this calmly, right? It's hard. I can't tell you anything. I don't know anything, even if I did, but I can't act as if nothing's happened, right? We all know something has happened. So I really love that, the way that they're getting information. Sandy, you and I talked about this earlier, or maybe it was Allison and I were talking about it, the way that sometimes these letters almost feel like texts. They almost feel like, separate individual ideas that are coming to people. And you see all of that here in this first letter.
Yeah. And just kind of interesting, a little background on Mo and Sylvia. They are both descendants of Eastern European Jews. So they're also going to start bumping into what's happening on the continent.
Yeah.
And so right now, he really doesn't get the full impact of that, but that might come up a little bit later. And we have some letters on our website on that.
Yeah, sorry, it's another question that's often asked, like, well, when did Jewish Americans in the service and when did the American military know definitively what was going on? And of course, that question very much depends on who you're talking to and when you're talking to them. But that for those that have heard the rumors, at least those that know, that there's a special urgency to get into combat with mainline German units, open up a route for the Russians to begin their advance again, which they'll do at the end of June in a massive offensive called Operation Bagration through Belarus. This is an opportunity to put a stop to that. And you can't do that from Sicily. You can do it from France, or you can at least begin the process from France.
I also wanted to add too that if Mo had decided to include any kind of information that he shouldn't have, it would have been redacted pretty quickly before it reached Sylvia. There's a new collection of letters in the collection from World War II. And one of our archivists, Alinda, is going through them. And we hear her getting frustrated because there are so many things that this guy is writing about that he shouldn't have been talking about. And they take X-Acto knives and cut out the pieces that are classified. So there are a lot of holes in those letters, but Mo didn't reveal anything that he shouldn't have. So his are fine.
And there's nothing more frustrating as an historian than to say, it's the stuff that gets X-Actoed out that you want, so in the First World War, sometimes they would take kind of black, what they call grease pencil and go over it. And sometimes if you put it up to the light at a certain angle, you can almost figure out what the word might have been. But yeah, it's frustrating because that's usually the good stuff that you want.
And I'll add on to that. One of the letters, she opened up the envelope and it was just strips of paper. Apparently they had censored like 90% of the letter and sent like a couple of strips home, which must have been very frustrating for the family too. But Sylvia is incredibly prolific in her letter writing. The letter we're going to look at is going to be 11 handwritten pages, and that is nothing for her. She'll whip out 11 pages a day to Mo. But she was born September 14th, 1912. She attended Brooklyn College, NYU School of Social Work, and Columbia College. She worked as a social worker, and she also worked on the draft board evaluating people to see if they were fit for service. And she died on February 1st, 2008 in Oceanside, New York. And a year later, their nephew, David, donated these letters to us. I think there's over 2,200 letters in the set. So we have a very significant amount of letters between both of them, which is quite rare because usually, Michael, in my experience, the letters from home don't survive nearly as much as the letters from soldiers being sent home.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true, because it's difficult, of course, to carry those things. You're really not supposed to have them in case there's some information that's being transmitted. And yeah, guys have to carry that stuff. So usually they keep, my experience has been they keep one or two that are really important or really special, and the rest they either send back home. So sometimes that's the way you get them, because they end up, I've worked in a couple of French collections where that's what happened. When a soldier would write back to his wife or sweetheart, he would include her last letter to him so that they would have them for posterity. But you're right, it's much rarer.
And so, like I said, Sylvia's letter is very long. So we have a bullet point of it, and then we have a lot of quotes because we just could not really trim it down any more than we did. So we're going to cross our fingers and hope we get through all of them because they're amazing. She describes D-Day in New York on June 6th as it's happening. She calls it both long awaited and feared. She talks about New York City being both tense and quiet. Everyone's glued to the news, to papers, to radio. And she talks about how the reaction around the city differed. People were crying, some were relieved, and nobody focused on work. And I find that kind of interesting because whenever major events happen now, it's very difficult to focus on work as well. She attended a multi-denominational prayer meeting, and she heard Roosevelt's presidential prayer on the radio and compared it to the Gettysburg Address. So with that, we're going to pop over here. And I think I'm reading this one, right, Allison?
That is correct.
All right, good. So, well, D-Day, it has come, God, so long awaited, so feared, so rejoiced, such release, such new tenseness, such excitement, such quiet. Well, darling, all of these feelings and emotions were expressed and felt by American people today. As you can well understand, people, and that includes me, were torn between feelings of gladness that the beginning of the end has come and with the fear of the great sacrifices. I want to tell you that the whole thing is being handled in the usual exciting American manner. Blow-by-blow description, comments by radio, long discussions on meager information in the newspaper, and a day of prayer by mayor, workers, and president. So, Mike, do you want to stop here and talk about this, and we'll chat about each quote, or do you want to read a bunch at a time?
Yeah, sure. We could. I mean, this is such a wonderful. I love the that kind of bullet text almost feeling of the way that she writes this. Just kind of, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm going through, and I got goosebumps just thinking about that. So long awaited and so feared, right? There's every chance that this goes wrong. There's every chance that it goes right, but somebody you care about and love is killed. There's every chance that, it's hard to figure out whether it's gone the way you want it to go or not. It's going to be days, weeks before you figure out whether it's gone the way you want it to go or not. That the beginning of the end. Again, we know how this ends. We know that D-Day is going to work, but it's not going to be what they thought it was going to be. It's going to take until August 25th to get to Paris. It's going to take until May 1945 to get to the end of the war. I mean, we're a long way to the end of that. They don't know that, of course. And again, the other thing I'm always impressed by, they don't know when the casualty reports are going to start coming back. They don't know whose names they're going to see there. It's a terrifying, it had to have been an absolutely terrifying thing. The other thing that, I think in American mythology, we overplay it a little bit, but this kind of sense, she says, in the usual exciting manner, this kind of image we have of the Second World War, of it being something that everybody was behind and everybody supported equally. And there's certainly a truth to that. I don't want to underplay that. What I tell my students, though, is that's the exception. It's not the rule in American history. The rule in American history is significant disagreement over military force and how we use it and why we use it, who benefits, who doesn't benefit. This is a case where, people are standing there. I don't know, that's not the Flatiron Building in New York, but it looks like it's somewhere downtown New York City, and they're Oh, Times Square, old Times Square. Okay. Yep. Yeah. And this is the way they're getting information. And what's different in 1944 is they're getting their information together. They're getting their information in a group. Whereas today, I think, we all get it on our phones and we interact differently to it. This is a communal experience. And you can almost see the guy on the right. You can almost see the tension in his face. And I think this photograph is great because you actually don't see anybody's faces. What you're actually seeing are them being focused on I guess that's the old New York Times building. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
And it has like the news feed.
Pre the remodel of Times Square. So, that's literally what they're doing. They're going down to the building that is where they're going to get their news, and they're doing it together. They're doing it as a group. And the other thing that I love about this is the sign on the far left that says buy war bonds. This is a distinctly American way of thinking about national crisis and war, that it is something to be done at the civic level, and it's something to be managed by civic groups as much as it is by the central government. And I'm going to give a talk in Italy in a couple of weeks on war memorials in the United States. And it's also true of our war memorials. We in America do not wait for the federal government to decide they're going to put a monument or a museum somewhere. We do that at the civic level. We do that at the local level. And you get some of that you're seeing in here as well. So there's just so much to talk about and unpack, both in the image and in the text that comes with it. This is the kind of stuff that my students are colonels, so they're a little too jaded and old for this. But when I taught undergraduates, that you could talk for 30 minutes with your students about that one image.
I love this because, as you said, they're all standing still and their backs are to the camera. And you know, walking around New York City, I don't really know of any place outside of a park people are seated where everybody just stands still.
Yeah.
You know, and I imagine it being this, like you said, this collective experience of learning about this news. And yeah, I get goosebumps almost.
And you could take this the other way too. And in both the photograph before and in this one, of course, all the faces are white. They all look middle class. They're all wearing business suits. This is Midtown Manhattan. So, you know, you could talk a little bit about that too. You know, but just the communal sense that you see, the guy on the far left is smiling. The two guys on the far right are clearly not. You know, that kind of shared sense of both fear and excitement, that kind of almost giddiness that I'm sure they're feeling, that things are going to start happening really fast now. This wasn't for nothing. That this is going to move quickly now.
Allison, do you want to read this one?
As I got into the train and, thank heaven, got a seat, looked at the rear page covering latest bulletins, and there was General Eisenhower's speech. I became excited and read the paper through. It was so exciting. People were deep in their papers, like never before. Few spoke. Even people traveling together did not speak. I read every word.
Before we jump to you, Mike, I'm going to say getting a seat on the subway or on a train is like the most New York thing you could possibly say.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that makes your morning better than getting a seat. Like, so.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, true in 1944, true when I was there just a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is the other thing that I'm always impressed by when you read press coverage. I just read a manuscript for a book that's about to come out on press relations with the Army in World War II, and the ways in which these guys were. These journalists, men and women, I should say, there were a number of fine female journalists that were covering World War II as well, Martha Gellhorn and Dorothy Thompson and others. So I should not use the masculine pronoun there. But what they're trying to balance, what they know is both what the Army is going to censor and what they have to self-censor. They have to balance that with writing exciting feed that's going to keep their readers riveted and tell their readers what's going on. And you see that people were deep in their papers. And this is a difference, I think, in the way we get news today, which is this very Twitter 280 character or whatever it is, short little blasts. Whereas these newspaper articles are really trying to be as in-depth as they possibly can without crossing the line into censorship. So you're almost reading, I mean, to me, they almost read like acts of literature. And some of these people, Dorothy Thompson and Martha Gellhorn and Liebling, these people were beautiful writers, much better, I think, than the journalists we have today, who are much more the kind of 5 Ws and move on. So, you know, that notion of reading the paper on the subway, right? And the news today is not about the heat wave or whatever it was. It's right. It's about this dramatic, once in a generation event that you know is going to define your country, your community, your family from here on out. If this doesn't work, you're in a completely different world than if it does.
And do you think the newspapers were cognizant of being careful about what they were writing because those casualty reports hadn't come out yet?
Absolutely, right. So Ernie Pyle was probably the most famous example of this. If you read Pyle's stuff, he'll say, you know, I was talking to Joe Smith of Terre Haute, Indiana. You know, he doesn't do that unless he's pretty sure that Joe Smith has made it, right? Because the worst thing in the world would be to write that. Although he did write about casualties and people he knew that had been killed. He wrote a very famous piece about Graves registration officers and how they dealt with death and casualty. So, you know, Pyle's not trying to sugarcoat anything to the American people. He's perfectly aware these communities are going to be hit by this. They're going to get these casualty lists, but they're also trying to be sensitive to that. You know, it could be weeks before you find out that your husband, your brother, your whatever has been killed. It could be a long, long time. So yeah, you need to be cognizant of those things. And this manuscript that I just got done reading, this book that's going to come out, talked a lot about the kind of culture of self-censorship among these reporters. That they had the Army's rules, and then they had their own kind of rules amongst themselves. And when one of the reporters broke those kind of unwritten rules, scooping another one with sensitive information or releasing stuff you shouldn't release, there were social consequences inside that press pool. So yeah, so the simple answer to your question is absolutely.
There are two really, really great questions, and I want to get to both of these before we move on. The first is from Angelo, and Angelo says, could you say that because news was received collectively, this is reflected in the general memory of the war and its major influence in society, which in a way is still present in our own time?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that, you know, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a myth and a stereotype, but you know, the everybody hanging on Walter Cronkite's word, right? I mean, that was what that generation did. There were a limited number of sources. There were a limited number of trustworthy sources. And for better or worse, we're in a world right now where there are infinite number of sources, most of whom are probably unreliable. And I do think I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it does change the way in which we think about things. I think it's a myth to think that news was ever objective. There were always political views involved in the news, either implicit or explicit. But in this time period, you know, it's a case where there really isn't a voice of opposition to the war. And that's not because of censorship. That's because everybody understood that the United States was fighting a just, moral, defensive conflict. And the longer the war went on, the more clear that became, which is not the usual pattern in history. Again, this thing that my students love to talk about, well, why can't we just do it the way we did World War II? Well, World War II is the clear exception. We did things very differently in that time period than we usually do in our wars. And one is the way in which we handled press and the way in which the press behaved on its own, this kind of self-censorship of the media that they engaged in.
The next one is from Carrie, and Carrie wants to know what kids were doing in school when all of this was going on.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the age, but I don't know a ton about it. There is a book by a man named William Tuttle that is about childhood during World War II that is very well done. He was a professor at the University of Kansas, which is about how children existed in wartime. And there's been some studies of British children in World War I as well. As far as I'm aware, once you get to about middle school, certainly in high school, there's very little effort to sugarcoat too much of this. They're trying to explain to students what is going on, to children what is going on, why your father's not there, why your uncle's not there. I think that's Tuttle's point, that children were not shielded in the way that they might have been in a different generation. I don't know a lot about childhood during World War II, except to recommend Tuttle's book to you, which is kind of the classic on this topic.
I found it, and it's called Daddy's Gone to War, and I'm putting that information in the chat for folks to look up.
Yeah, that's
it. I know
we
have a lot of, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's a brilliant book. It's a really brilliant book. And I think he was a professor of American studies, technically, not history. So there's a lot of stuff in there that pulls on sociology and pulls on literature. And it's an excellent book.
And I know we have a lot of different kinds of posters from World War II, from by war bonds to the don't talk about sensitive information, and the like mother and child is a common motif, and the ghost of a father, or like protecting the family. So those are things that kids would have seen out and about as well too.
No
so
doubt.
that they would have seen those images.
Yeah, no doubt. And they would have been involved in, bond drives and scrap metal drives. And, I think most historians have said that, some of the stuff like, pick up your kitchen waste and your bacon fat, that, that's as much to give people something to do, and it's as much to give children something to do so that they also feel a part of what they're doing. The Army doesn't need bacon fat. It's an effort to make sure that everybody in the community understands that we're all doing this together. And that extends to children.
Yeah, we have one of those posters where there's a frying pan with bacon fat in it, and they're pouring it directly into an artillery piece. It's weird.
To the best of my knowledge, nobody in the United States ever did that, right? I mean, yeah, maybe in Russia, but it's someplace where natural resources were thinner on the ground. But our war was not an artisanal war where you're collecting bacon fat. It's a fully industrialized war.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read the next one. When I arrived at the office, several girls were crying. Others glad it had finally came. Tenseness, which had been accumulating during the last few weeks, was released. Needless to say, no one could work. As for myself, I didn't cry, darling. I felt as if I had been feeling all along that it is good, sorry, it has started. What will happen will do so. And the sooner this gets started, the sooner it will be over. I am fully aware of the dangers and sacrifices. I am ready for them. I have been thinking of them for so long. I spent my time trying to reassure others. Now, it's kind of interesting because this is hard to read a little bit because she is having that stream of consciousness writing. And so it doesn't flow as well as some of her other letters, but it's so much more emotional, I think, because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we first discussed this letter together a couple of days ago, my first thought was, wouldn't it have been wonderful to sit down and have a cup of coffee with Sylvia and talk to her about this letter. That's another thing. It's a side note, but I mean, the children we're teaching now are going to be the first generation with no memory whatsoever of no one that they knew that had served, and that's going to change the way we have to think about the way we teach this stuff. Even my daughters at least got to meet my great uncle, who was a World War II veteran, though he didn't like talking about it. That of course is not going to be happening anymore. So there are a few things here that I'm again, that tension between the tenseness and the kind of release is another one that I think is just incredible. The kind of sense of I'll sacrifice, I won't cry, I'm gonna be tough, I'm gonna fight through this in my own way and do the things that I have to do. The other thing that I thought was really wonderful, that last line, so I spent my time trying to reassure others. This sense again of a communal experience, and that there are people who might need a little word into their ear that, I know your brother is in Europe, but we have to keep focused. We have to do what we're trying to do. And again, I just keep coming back to this. They have no idea whether somebody that they care about was involved and whether somebody that they care about is going to come back or not. They just don't know. So all of that, and that the images here again, I mean, I remember after 9/11 when churches and synagogues stayed open all night, this kind of sense of people wanting to be with others, of wanting to be in a communal space in a situation like this one. And again, we had it in 9/11. I don't know of an experience where we've had it since. But that kind of natural human emotion. And this says West 42nd Street, so I'm guessing you're back in Times Square again, and I'm guessing these are folks again trying to get news, trying to find out what's going on. And the guy in the back smoking the cigarette, you can see the tension in his face. And again, I think the difference between our generation and theirs is that our generation, we will get a lot of noise mixed in with the signal. That is, we'll get a lot of crap on Twitter that later we have to go back and say, okay, that was wrong. At least the idea here is the information will come more slowly, but it will come from credible sources, so that when the New York Times prints something, you're going to be able to rely on it more than you will just picking something up off of Joe on Twitter, which I think is one of the great changes from this generation to that one. And the other thing that I what was struck by, of course, I had been feeling all along that it is good it has started, right? Again, you're 2 years into this war, 2 years plus into this war, and you're finally getting the sensation that it is starting, at least in the European theater, that it is starting, that all the other stuff you've been doing has literally been a sidelight, that now we're getting into the thing that we need to get into. And that means things are going to get more dangerous, things are going to get more bloody, more sacrifices at home, but this is the moment to do it. Get this thing over with and get us home, which is when army sociologists asked soldiers in Europe and the Pacific, why are you fighting this war? The number one answer was, so I can go home.
Okay. I do have a question, but I'm going to wait until after the next slide to ask it. So we're going to let Allison read next.
Late in the afternoon, we were informed that the little Homer requested presence at a prayer meeting in Madison Park, where a light burns ever for the soldiers who died in the last war. So at 5 p.m., went there. Around the corner from the office, there were crowds and crowds. The mayor came with Mr. Whaler and loads of cameramen, and a Catholic priest and Rabbi Wise and Protestant pastor said prayers. Then an English opera singer sang God Save the King. A French free who received a lot of applause sang the Michael, help me out here.
Marseillaise. It's actually spelled wrong there, but that's okay. Sylvia probably spelled it wrong, but it's the Marseillaise. Yeah.
Thank you. Which is very stirring. Papers drifted down from the tall buildings, then the Italian anthem was played as Italy was welcomed as a member of the Allied nations.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack here. Rabbi Wise refers to Rabbi Stephen Wise, who was, I assume, Rabbi Stephen Wise, who was a close advisor to Franklin Roosevelt, and before that had been, there he is, had been actually an advisor to several presidents, and Wise was one of the people really making the point, I suppose, that you don't. Wise was making the point from the late 1930s that American Jews should not be making the point that we should get involved in the war to help the persecuted Jews of Europe, but that the war should be an American war for the entire American community. So the choice of Wise here is a very important and very symbolic one for who he was and what he stood for, and the influence he had on Roosevelt. He was so focused on his American identity more even than his Jewish identity, that many more religious Jews were quite critical of him for that. So he's an interesting figure in his own right, a very bright, very smart, very thoughtful guy. The other thing, of course, that I love about this passage here is all of the international stuff that's getting mixed up here. So a French, and then in parentheses, free. So I just finished writing a book on America's relationship with Vichy France, the collaborationist French government, with which the United States was just breaking relations at the time of D-Day. I guess but hadn't yet turned to Charles de Gaulle. So the Marseillaise is the French national anthem today, but it was not the French national anthem of the Vichy government. They had banned La Marseillaise as being revolutionary. So it's very interesting. This is an example of what I argued in the book, that the American people have actually made this transition even before the Franklin Roosevelt administration had made it. And the Italy bit is probably, the must have been very interesting in a city like New York with an Italian mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, half Italian, half Jewish mayor, and so many Italian Americans in the city. The United States, of course, had been fighting the Italian army until the fall of 1943 when it flipped sides. So there's a lot going on here in this moment here on June 6th, and it's the creation of this real international coalition that you see. I think that's a French officer there leading what I assume was the Marseillaise. That looks like a French, no, it's not a Frenchman. That looks like a New York City police officer and the policeman's band. So who knows what they're playing there. But it's, it's this moment of this kind of internationalism, which is really important to the American people in 1944-45, because of course we had rejected that same kind of internationalism at the end of World War I. And now there's this very open debate about what to do in World War II. And what Roosevelt and later Truman decide is they're going to keep the spirit of Woodrow Wilson, but the institutions that the United States creates, like NATO, the Bretton Woods economic arrangements, will be institutions that the United Nations will be institutions that the United States will absolutely control, so that we'll be a part of the world, but in a way that tips it to us. And you're starting to see that popular spirit come up in 1943, and then again you see it here in 1944. And the other thing, when we were talking about this letter, I kept thinking of the scene in Casablanca where the band plays La Marseillaise, and the rousing spirit that song does bring. It is an absolutely stirring national anthem when you hear it, especially when you hear it played live and played very loudly. So I can only imagine what it must have been like. I'm assuming the New York City policeman's band or whatever that is played it, and it must have been something to see and hear. It must have been great.
But also, like, this picture is just insane for the amount of people that have gathered here. And you can see like the film cameras probably shooting newsreel that they would show. My guess is like before the movie theaters, right? Like the little newsreels they would show at the movie theaters.
Yep, I would guess so. And again, look at all the faces are white, or at least they all look pretty white from here. So a reminder that this was we're fighting this war for democracy and this war for freedom with a segregated army. We're doing it alongside a free French system that has not yet desegregated its army. So there are a lot of complexities here. A British ally that is treating its Indian soldiers very poorly and creating a famine in Bengal so that it can continue to feed people in England. So there are a lot of complexities working here. That's not to say that most of the people in that crowd would have been cognizant of those complexities, though my guess is some of them would have. The issue of the Italians is the really interesting one, right? Because this, again, New York City is a city with a sizable population of everybody, but Italian Americans are also, of course, quite prominent. You're not that far from Little Italy in Madison Square. You're, not that close, but you're not that far either. And so it's significant. The other thing she talks about Madison Park, where a light burns for the soldiers. I don't think the light still burns, but in Madison Park, there is still a First World War memorial tucked away in the woods there. This is a thing that I do. I go to cities and look for their World War I memorials. New York has something like 59 of them. The biggest one is in the Bronx. There's another one on the Upper East Side that's pretty prominent right on the edge of Central Park. But they're kind of everywhere. There's one in Chinatown on the wall of a church. And there is one in Madison Square Park. So again, the way we could talk about this much more, but the way in which the First World War is hanging over the memory of the Second for Americans in good ways and in bad. And you see her, it's interesting to me that she begins that letter by noting, we went to the place where we remember the veterans of the First World War to do this. We understand that what we're doing is in their shadow, and in a certain way, it is to complete the mission that was left incomplete when they went, which is the way a lot of Americans understood the Second World War. And also this is New York City. This is not your average American city. This is a place that is, was in the 1940s and is today unusually diverse, unusually ecumenical in the way that it does things. New York this is one of the things about that city that I love so much. Being different or standing out just doesn't matter in New York, because everybody is different or stands out in New York. And it is a place that does that, not all the time. I don't want to overstress this, but does this when it does it well, really, really well. And Fiorello LaGuardia was a living symbol of that.
We have one more quote from Sylvia. So she says, then Igor Gorin, a White Russian, sang, of all things, the Internationale. What a faux pas. Evidently, there had been no time for Igor to learn the new Russian anthem. Wow, I was terrified. And funny, because most of us knew about the new Russian anthem. By the way, the attitude towards Russia has changed considerably here. It is realized that she has taken her place as a nation alongside us, and that she is no longer a bugaboo.
Again, so much to unpack here. This has been one of the things that Vladimir Putin has been banging on about, and you don't have to agree with him, but you have to do some strategic empathy in trying to see the world the way that he sees it. In his belief that it was Russia, it was the Soviet Union that broke the back of Germany. It wasn't Normandy, and it wasn't the Eisenhower, and it wasn't the 82nd Airborne Division. It was the Soviet Union. And I was just in Berlin a couple of weeks ago. I went to a place called Karlshorst, which is where the Russians and Germans signed the instrument of surrender. And inside that building is a wall with the names of all of the Russian units that fought to free Berlin, And there are 189 units on that wall. The Russians, we think, lost somewhere in the neighborhood 25 to 45 million people out of the Soviet Union. That margin of error is many times greater than the entire casualty list of the US, Britain, France, Canada, all put together. It's just in the margin of error. So this notion, we realize that she has taken her place as a nation alongside us, doesn't happen until 1944, right? And this is, again, something that Russians in the 1940s were worried about, and Putin still, again, harps on about. There's a great quotation that I have somewhere in my Liberation of Paris book, where General Dean, who is the American military attaché to the Soviet Union, comes to brief Stalin to tell him, look, we've done Overlord. It succeeded. Here's what we're doing. And he says, I just can't convince the Russians that this is a serious military operation, because in Russian eyes, it's so small. It's 7 divisions and some airborne guys, right? When the Russia, again, if you go ahead and Google a map of Operation Bagration, Bagration, and you'll see the size and scale and scope of the way the Russians do an operation. So I find that really interesting, that it took until 1944 for her to make that statement. And the other thing just that I was laughing about, the Internationale is, of course, the International Communist Anthem, and it's being sung by Igor Gorin, a White Russian. The White Russian, in this case, either means he's from Belarus or it means he's an anti-communist. My guess is it means he's from Belarus in this case. So it's a communist national anthem. And again, she says it's a faux pas. He shouldn't have done it, right? You don't sing the communist national anthem right in New York City. Even in New York City, you don't do it, where there is, of course, a very strong left-leaning tradition in that city as well. So again, a lot of fun to do here and a lot to unpack here. I've been talking with my students a lot about the way that Vladimir Putin and his inner circle's memories of World War II matter in the way that he's thinking about this war in Ukraine. And one of the things that he comes back to continually is that it took the West a very long time to treat the Russians as an equal when they should have been doing it all along. Now, there are reasons for that. And again, I'm not here to defend Vladimir Putin in any way, shape, size, or form, merely to point out that in his worldview, people like Sylvia matter because of the way that they were treating Russia.
We're going to move on to Sidney Diamond, who's our last soldier that we're going to talk about. He was born in 1922, and he attended City College as a chemical engineering major. He enlisted on April 24th, 1942, and it's really interesting because he gave up his college deferral in order to join the Army, and it led to some arguments between him and his fiance at the time. So it was interesting to read through his letters and see him tell her why he had to join the Army, why he felt he had to do this. He was killed in action on January 29th, 1945 at Fort Stotzenberg. I hope I said that correctly. And he earned a posthumous Silver Star for his bravery. So we were going to ask Shelby to read this letter for us tonight.
June 7th, 1944. Darling, the news of the continental invasion is the primary source of conversation. You probably have had yourself stuffed with the news, etc. Consequently, we need to not go into it. I heard the report during a movie in the hospital. Picture was stopped, news announced. Estelle, there were no cheers, no shouts. We all sat still. We'd fought, we'd made beachheads. Ours was a deep sympathy, a silent prayer. Good luck, brother, good luck.
This one, I guess I'm reading through the prism of my students who are Army colonels, and I'm reading this as a letter from someone who understands what this is, understands on a visceral, professional level what is happening. So no cheers, because we don't yet know what's going on, and we know even if it's successful, thousands of lives are going to be ended. No shouts, deep sympathy, and then that good luck, brother, good luck, because that's really all you can do at this point. And you see this in every war. You see people who volunteer when they hear about something like this, the Tet Offensive in Vietnam or whatever it is, they volunteer to give up whatever job they're doing or whatever leave they're on or whatever rotation they were supposed to do to go back to combat units because they want to do something other than just say, good luck, brother. So this one to me, I just kept hearing the voices of my students who, that same kind of professional awareness and understanding. We teach Clausewitz here, and one of the things Clausewitz does is he compares war to a card game where you know what cards you have, but you really don't know what cards the guys on the other players on the table have. You can make some educated guesses. There'll be some bluffing. There'll be some miscommunication, but you really don't know until it's over. And you can feel that in this letter that we've made the beachhead, we've made some advances, we're fighting, and that's what we should be doing. But a silent prayer, good luck, because we don't yet know how this is going to turn out. And it's, I think, the hardest thing. We call it hindsight bias in my field, but it's the hardest thing to do, to explain to people that in June 1944, none of these people know what's about to happen.
Right.
Least of all him.
Right. We are going to go to our last letter. We're going to have Michael read this one for us, so everybody gets a turn tonight.
I want to put this in context for you. So Eisenhower wrote out a message Eisenhower gives the order that we're going to do D-Day despite bad weather and despite some conflicting intelligence. We're going to do it. He gives the order. And then he finds out for the first time in about 18 months, he really has nothing to do. He's planned this attack. He's given the order to go. It's out of his hands now. So he went and gave you've all seen the picture, I'm sure, where he's briefing some of the airborne guys. And among the things he's telling them is, we have complete air supremacy over the drop zone. When you look up in the air and you see an airplane, it's ours. It's going to have those stripes on it. We're good. You're not going to have to worry about what's above you. Then he goes back to his tent and he writes out a message of what he's going to say if this works. And then he takes out another piece of paper, and you can see how tired and exhausted he was, that he dated it July 5th, not June 5th. The original's in New Orleans at the World War II Museum. It's actually not in the National Archives. And he writes this message in which he says, our landings in the Cherbourg Arve area have failed to gain a Saturday. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the original of it? Did we have, I sent you guys two, maybe we don't have it.
No, I don't have it. Can you pull that up, Allison?
Do we have that?
1 sec.
Yeah, sorry, this is the second version of the memo.
Okay.
The screenshot I sent you guys had both, had the beginning and the end. Sorry about that.
Nope.
Anyway, you can get the point here. And when we see the first version, you'll see he wrote it in the passive voice. He wrote a kind of wishy-washy first note. And then as exhausted as he was, as stressed as he was, one of the people around him said he could almost light his cigarettes simply by putting them on his forehead. He was under so much stress. And then he rewrote it, and you can see his crossouts here. And he wrote, our landings in the Cherbourg Arve area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. And this is the line I love. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. And I love this. And he folded both of those notes, the one if it works and the one if it doesn't work. He put them in the two jackets of his pocket and he fell asleep, not knowing when he woke up which one of those he was going to pull out and read to the media. But I always teach this note every time I teach writing here at the Army War College, in part because it shows the importance of eliminating passive voice, and it shows the importance of using a small number of words to convey a message. And the message Eisenhower is conveying here is, look, if this goes wrong, you don't blame the people whose letters we were just talking about. You don't blame Sergeant Diamond, and you don't blame those people. These were my decisions. Come after me. And I'm always admiring of that, and I'm always admiring of Eisenhower on that day for what he did.
Allison's getting the image right now.
Yep, I'm getting it right now, putting it in the chat for everyone to see.
And while she's doing that, I wanted to ask you, like, one of the things I think that's in my head is that I didn't realize people knew about D-Day on June 6th. I have the idea in my head that they didn't have the news. They didn't share the news out as it was happening, that blow by blow kind of information. So how surprising is that? Did they do that for any other offensive, or was it that important?
So there is a specific attention done to this one because, of course, of the importance, the strategic importance of this. We should know, we didn't talk about this, but the phrase D-Day simply means day one of any operation. D-Day and H-hour simply means the beginning. So D+3 means 3 days after. So really the thing that's the secret is not the D-Day. So every operation has a D-Day and everybody understands what that means, or everybody involved in the operations mean. The codename Overlord is what makes it unusual. That's the unique idea, I guess we would say in our day. This one is, Eisenhower was also very good at managing the media and managing public relations and managing public affairs, and they want this explained to the American people. They want people to understand what it is they're doing. They also want people to understand that this is not the end. This is the beginning of the end, exactly as I think Sylvia wrote in one of her letters. So yeah, it's part of a concerted public relations and media campaign to get information to the American people.
And I'm going to pop this over here. This is the image that you sent us.
There it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So take a look at the one on the left. Our landings in the Cherbourg Arve area failed to gain a satisfactory hold, and the troops have been withdrawn. The decision to attack was based on the best information available. He got that far, and then he said, nope, not going to do it that way, and scratched it out and wrote, our landings in the Cherbourg Arve area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. If any fault or blame attaches to this operation, it is mine and mine alone. And I teach this to every time, as I said, every single time I teach writing, I use this as an example. The one on the left, nobody would have, except maybe, professional historians, nobody would have cared about that one. The one on the right, anybody who's talking about how to communicate with words will get. And this comes from Dwight Eisenhower, who at West Point was not the greatest student, but throughout the course of his professional life, learned how to do this and learned above all how to communicate in the way that he learned how to communicate. And I've always really admired that particular memorandum. If you go to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, you can see the original. They have it on display there.
Okay. And with that, brings us to the end of the program. Allison, are there a couple, we have time for maybe one or two questions. So Allison.
Yeah, there are a lot of really great questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. There were a lot of people in tonight's program, which is a great thing. So there was a question from Reverend Lori West, and the Reverend says, Mike, that you are an amazing historian and that you would be an amazing war correspondent. So keep that in your back pocket as perhaps a next career move.
No, I'm good with mine. Thank you. I'm good with the one I got. I don't know how good I would be at war. I know quite a few of those folks, and it takes a particular mindset and a willingness to really take a lot of risks that I'm not sure my personality at age 53, maybe at 23, but not at 53.
Gotcha.
Well, Reverend West asks that you speak on the importance of the 82nd Airborne in Operation Overlord. And I'm scrolling down to an update on that question that says, to clarify regarding the question about 82nd Airborne, was strictly due to the Reverend's family having a strong tie to the Airborne, and they're very proud of them throughout history.
As well they should be. So a friend of mine likes to compare airborne people to cavalry in the 19th century. The idea is that they will get in behind the enemy quickly. They'll appear in places where the enemy is not expecting them, and they'll go for high value targets, communication centers, railway crossings, things like that. The airborne has a particular culture. No matter how high ranking you are, you pack your own parachute. They have a very particular ethos and very particular way of doing things. They are an elite. They understand themselves to be an elite. They take their identification as an elite very, very seriously. And that all comes from the 82nd and 101st, the two American airborne units that drop in Normandy. They're the first time we really do anything like this on this large a scale. It's quite risky. It ends up working out extremely well. And if you ever go, Reverend West, to Normandy, there are at least two churches I know of that have American paratroopers in the stained glass of their churches. So be sure not to miss that. One of them is in a town called St. Mary-Glise, and the other is in a tiny town on the Cherbourg Peninsula, whose name I cannot recall now. I was there in 2019. If you want, I can probably find the name of the town. But yeah, they're doing an incredibly dangerous but critically important job securing what would have been understood as the eastern and western flanks of what they would have called the Lodgeman area, which is where those 5 beaches were. So yeah, I love working with paratroop guys because they rarely, how do I want to put this? They rarely see obstacles in the way that I see them. They see obstacles as something to just ram right through and get to the heart of the issue. They have a particular mindset in the way they do things, and they're wonderful to work with.
Also, one more.
The next question comes from Ray, and if I pronounce this town wrong, Ray, I'm so sorry, from Papillion, Nebraska. And Ray says, I am curious about the medical treatment and facilities for the men who acted out this invasion. Yeah. It seems like it would almost be impossible to help them during the invasion. Casualties had to be high amongst those who are trying to save lives. Can you speak to that a little?
Only a little. There are some histories of the medical corps. There is, I think you can download the official history of the medical corps in World War II is available as a download from the Army Center of Military History. All of the official histories of World War II, you can download all of them free of charge from the Center of Military History, and they're really wonderful official histories. There's a lot of them, and there is one of the medical corps. Medical care was something that was built into the plan. It was something that the Americans took great pride in, that although it was going to be difficult to evacuate casualties in the early hours of this invasion, they would get medical care to these men somehow, some way. Paramedics, offshore medical stuff, hospital boats, whatever they had to do, they were going to do it. So the Americans took great pride in their ability to get medical care to their soldiers. They contrasted that with the Germans and Russians, who were not as good at this, and the Japanese in the Pacific. The Americans took incredible pride in what the medical corps could do. So I would recommend, I can't tell you much more than that because I don't know much more than that, except to tell you to go to the U.S. Army Center for Military History and find the official history of the medical corps and download that. And it'll tell you everything you could ever want to know.
And with that, I know we went a little bit over tonight, and I want to thank you, Michael, for staying with us.
Sure, of course.
Allison, do you want to tell people about our upcoming programs?
Sure. Our next session of Inside the Vault is Thursday, July 7th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be joined by Professor Eric Slaughter to discuss Thomas Paine's work, Common Sense. It's going to be amazing. Please join us. I'm so excited for it.
We're going to have trouble selecting quotes from that one too.
I'm prepared to go over the time. So, reminders that our self-paced courses and summer seminars are available. Summer seminars are available, ready for you to sign up, ready and waiting. And self-paced courses are available all the time on our website. She'll be sharing links to both of those in the chat. And on top of that, we're so excited. History School is back. For those of you who have participated in History School with the youngsters in your household or know people that have, we're happy that it is returning again this summer. Opportunities are available for students upper elementary through high school. And if you check your email tomorrow, you'll see a list of the offerings for those different levels. Registration's open through or until July 5th. Last but not least, there will be a 2-hour program on Zoom entitled American Indian Soldiers Across U.S. Military History. And that is going to be led by Professor Tom Holm and Master Teacher Alana Whitebird. It's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. on June 14th. So again, all of the things that you're seeing tonight will be linked for you in the email tomorrow, including this recording, the slide presentation, all of the links to sign up for all of our really cool upcoming stuff. If you have questions for us, please email collectionprograms@gilderlehrman.org. And as always, we're always happy to hear from you. So send us an email.
Michael, it's been amazing talking to you tonight. We could talk all night. I think it would be amazing just to sit and chat with you. Did you have any final words for the audience before we close for the evening?
Yeah, just keep doing what you're doing and keep lighting the spark with your students, and keep making sure that you're giving them an opportunity to talk about these topics. I'm worried as an historian that the further we get from World War II, the more it's going to be the Hollywood version of this that people learn. And there's so much more, and there's so much more richness to it. So just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody, and we'll see you next month. Bye.
Bye, everyone.